Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. My Wi-Fi is giving me some grief today, so I hope this works out. Welcome to Camp Fiable. Let's get our presentation started. All right, so if you're new here, welcome to Camp Fiable again. This is a really cool way to learn about different things and get involved. Today I'll be talking about land and water. This is really important because land and water are two things that obviously we need to survive. And so, yeah. A little bit about me before we get started. My name is Sumi. I'm a rising junior. I live in Colorado. I'm super passionate about the environment. I have my own organization that I'm working on registering as a nonprofit organization right now. And yeah, if you want to stick around, I do have a calculus lecture to teach next. Upcoming streams, I have one left. It'll be all about environmental ethics, just summing up everything that we've learned and talking about how this affects not only the environment but humans and what we can do to reduce our impact. Cool. So the first thing I want to touch on is public versus private land. Private land is anything that's kind of owned by a corporation or owned by an individual. So your house and all the land around it that you own is like private land, whereas kind of community spaces, roads, infrastructure, that's all on public land. So it's usually owned by the government. And when we have public land, something that happens a lot is called tragedy of the commons, where essentially because you don't own it and it's not yours, you don't take good care of it and you just want to get as much benefit out of it as possible. And so if you think about it like fishing, we're actually going to talk about fishing later. If it's not your ocean, you don't have self-interest to keep the fish population alive, so overfishing becomes a problem. And externalities are also another thing that corporations don't really consider. So an environmental externality would be, I guess, filling your car up with gas. And the cost of filling your car up with gas is, the cost that it takes to produce the gas, transport it, and fill it up in your car. However, cost that isn't calculated in that is the cost that it has to the environment and how it affects everyone. And so that's why we get a lot of negative externalities. And a solution to a lot of the public land problems that the government uses right now is permit-based regulations. So we don't have that much public land, as in land that everyone can just use. It's all permit-based pretty much. So if you want to have grazing permits, you can get a permit for how many animals will graze on that land. Or if you want fishing, the same thing. Even emissions permits are often permit-based, and you can purchase more permits in order to pollute more, which is kind of bad, but that's the way it is. Okay, and before kind of a few hundred years ago, humans lived mainly on, farms and rural areas. However, after the Industrial Revolution, we got a lot more urban areas and cities, and this kind of causes a lot of, problems because um most most of the pollution and everything comes from urban areas, and as urban areas expand, that's called urban sprawl, that leads to more dependence on cars and automobiles and more traffic, which increases pollution. And kind of the way that works is people who are living in the city will often move outwards to live in the suburbs. I'm sure many of you live in the suburbs, and then they commute to work every day jobs and cause kind of more urbanization, and that causes a lot more transportation, a lot more infrastructure to have to be built. And that also increases the chances of flooding because we don't have kind of as much permeable land. So flooding becomes a big problem as well, especially because climate change is causing harsher and harsher weather conditions. And the next thing is deforestation and soil erosion. So deforestation is major because trees have always kind of reduced the carbon, but if we're cutting down trees and replacing them with things that are producing even more carbon or a bigger greenhouse effect. And so some of the major causes of deforestation are mining, paper, overpopulation, ranching, and logging. So coal mining is one of the biggest causes of deforestation because you need to kind of clear cut a lot of land in order to mine for coal. And coal is actually really bad because not only does it lead to deforestation, but it also leads to pollution because coal not only releases CO2, but also sulfur and a lot of particulates and just nasty stuff. And soil erosion, which is essentially the loss of nutrients in the soil. If you're mining on land, you're gonna kind of be destroying all the soil that's on that land. And deforestation also leads to loss of biodiversity. Um, so it's estimated that we're losing 137 plant, animal, and insect species every single day, which adds up to I think 50,000 a year, and that's really really crazy because you know every species deserves to live and to kind of thrive on this earth, but because of a lot of the problems that humans are causing, we're impacting a lot of species. And these are kind of some photos of deforestation and soil erosion. You can see that the wind just blows the good kind of topsoil right off of the earth. And that leads us to the next thing is that when we have droughts or lack of water, we also increase soil erosion. Most of our fresh water is also used for agriculture. I touched on that in the last video, and also generating electricity is a um, big cause of water usage. And then the rest goes towards households and municipalities. So the water that we drink and cook with is not really a big part of water usage, but it is a lot. I think for households, the most water usage is obviously showering, and watering your lawns is a big one. Um, and then only a really small percentage of water is accessible to us on the earth. So if, people are thinking about, oh, well, it's the water cycle, why can't we just, reuse the same water we have been using. That's actually kind of a fallacy because water that's going back into the oceans or whatever is not actually water that we can use as people. We don't drink ocean water, we don't use it to water our lawns or anything. And then a lot of the water that we have on the earth is ice. Um, so that leaves us a really small percentage of accessible fresh water. And global climate change can also lead to droughts, and water shortages are a big problem as well. If we have water shortages, we can't, drink water, and we don't have water to water our plants. So that can be a big problem, especially in third world countries who don't have access to water and who can't get water from other countries like the United States. If we have a big water shortage, we have a lot more leverage to get water. However, the developing world doesn't have that luxury. And then going on with that, along with freshwater is ocean health. The ocean has a very delicate pH and salt balance, and global climate change can destroy this. So that leaves unhealthy oceans and dead zones, and we kind of destroy ocean habitat for sea life. Even if we're not kind of physically destroying it, we're ruining it and making it uninhabitable. And so a big part of that is thermohaline currents. So thermohaline currents are essentially currents that are supposed to go from kind of the Arctic down to the south and then go back up. And that requires salt because the currents will go from the bottom of the ocean up, and then as it travels back north, it'll cool down and sink again. But again, this requires salt, and the problem with that is we dilute a lot of the water because global climate change causes ice to melt. And so we're losing the thermohaline currents, meaning that nutrients from the ocean aren't circulating properly, and that's causing a lot of dead zones and places where plants can't live, and where plants can't live, a lot of the fish can't live because fish eat sea life, and then bigger sea life eats that sea life. So, yeah. And then acid rain, that's a problem for both freshwater and ocean water. If the ocean becomes more acidic, it can become so acidic that fish can't live in it, and that can be a really big problem as well. And then to go along with that, a way that we're more kind of directly destroying the ocean life is fishing. Fishing is a really big problem, and even though it kind of seems like, oh, you're just kind of on a boat catching a few fish, it's actually a lot worse than that. Most of our fishing is done with big fishing nets, and those can actually stay in the ocean and they end up kind of in the big garbage patch. And yeah, that causes ocean pollution, plastic pollution, that's not very good. And also biodiversity loss because we're overfishing really drastically. And the fish that we target aren't always the fish that we get. So bycatch is a big problem as well. And bycatch is essentially where not only are the fish that we want to catch being caught in the nets, but also endangered species like dolphins, sea turtles, sharks can also get caught up in the nets and they can die there. And then microplastics is a big thing because as plastics break down, they become so tiny that fish just kind of absorb them into their bodies, and when they kind of drink the ocean water, they're just getting all that plastic inside of them, and that causes health problems for them, diseases. It can even cause them to die. And dead zones are also caused by chemicals, and overgrowth of algae. We also touched on that in our agriculture lecture. Cool. And then this is just a infographic. We're kind of killing 250,000 plus sea turtles a year, 100 million sharks, and 300,000 small whales and dolphins. These are all endangered species, and we're causing them to be even more endangered by just fishing. And so, even if it isn't intentional, fishing is extremely harmful. So, cutting fish can be a really big part of saving the environment. Um, there's this funny quote. It says, well, you're willing to stop using straws to save the fish, but you're not willing to stop eating fish to save the fish. And that kind of goes to show that a lot of the things that we are doing and we don't even realize can cause kind of these really harmful effects. And these are some images of bycatch, where fish and sea life have been caught in these nets and then they are trapped there and they die. Cool. So that's it. No one is here, but I would like to suggest a few things along with not eating fish, which is obviously a super big thing, but also some other things that you can avoid or do. Let's flip back here. Not using scrubs or anything with microbeads is a big one. And then obviously limiting pollution, limiting electricity usage are all big ones. Don't turn on the lights unless you have to. I don't have the lights on right now. And yeah, using natural light. Yeah, eating organic, eating locally produced, not using way too much water. And yeah, basically not using energy and yeah, minimizing your carbon footprint are some of the main things that you can do to decrease kind of large scale pollution and large scale harm to oceans and freshwater. As for land use, I'm not obviously going to tell you to move, but just being conscious of how much you're driving your car, whether you can, find a job first in smaller cities or closer to where you live, working from home, or even taking public transport is a lot better to prevent you causing pollution from urbanization and urban sprawl. All right, that's all I have for you today. If you want to stick around, at 6 o'clock, I do have my calculus lecture. Otherwise, I hope you're enjoying your summer. Yeah, see you next week for our last and final lecture. Bye.